melt is when I'm ocean waves.
Tonight on Nova Legends podcast, I have the great Matthew Hatfield from Virginia Preps, who yesterday he did the play-by-play for, or the color, I believe, for both the Class 5 and Class 6 state championships. He's going to share his thoughts about those games with us. Matthew, thanks for doing this.
Always a pleasure, Julian. It's a great time of year. It's almost Christmas, New Year. We go from 2022 to 2023, and the change of seasons from the fall sports to the winter sports.
Yeah, we'll be talking about basketball soon because I saw your post about the John Marshall DeMatha game last night. So we got some great basketball that we're getting ready for. But let's finish this football season off right. So first of all, how was the environment down there? I know the Class 5 game was one local team, Maury, so they probably had a pretty good showing. And they were playing against Highland Springs, that was not far away from Richmond. But the two teams in Class 6 are from Northern Virginia. Were there good crowds down there, and how was the environment?
Well, it's funny you said, because people ask me how many people were, the official attendance figures. If you look at the printed out stats that we get, that we try to tweet out and get, it has 763 and it's cut off the ink. So I'm assuming that means it was more than 7,600 people there in attendance, which is pretty solid, I think, considering, speaking with one of the ODU Stadium officials, they were wondering if they would get more than 5,000 to 6,000. And I know after the first game, I spoke with one of those people that runs the show, if you will, in a lot of ways there in conjunction with the Virginia High School League. And he was very pleased with the turnout for the Maury Highland Springs game, which was expected because you had a 7-5-7 team against an 804 program that travels well. And I think even though it was two Northern Virginia schools down in Norfolk, and there was some grumbling, some folks up in Nova about why not have the game up here, I think all in all, it was a pretty solid turnout. Madison did as well as they could in that game. Freedom was just absolutely terrific, as they've been all year long. And they brought a good amount of people from Woodbridge down for that game. So I think it was a good turnout, all things considered. All 6 championship games were decided by 14 points or more. You really have no control of that if you're a fan, a spectator, someone involved with running these championship games. But to me, the 6 teams that were as dominant as can be, 5 of them were undefeated, Julian, that won. The one that wasn't undefeated won its 7th straight state championship. So when you consider all that, the best teams probably won. There was not really a shocker or surprise or major upset, if you will.
Yeah, we definitely had 6 chalk teams win. But I did watch. Let's start off with the Class 6 game, and I watched the whole game on NFHS. You did a great job with your TV work. I thought it was a great game. It was a lot more than I expected. I watched Marshall put my Yorktown team out. My kids go to Yorktown, and I was impressed with Madison that day. But when you go against the speed and the explosiveness of Freedom, I didn't know how they'd match up. I thought overall, I thought the breaks did not go Madison's way. Mm-hmm. I think that they tried hard to claw back into this game, but it was a thrilling game. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to tip your hat to Justin Counts and company to have a chance to be in this game after an 0-3 start, which was, to me, unfathomable. They graduated 29 seniors from a year ago. They did a lot of things right that ordinarily, if you're playing an opponent that isn't almost, I feel like, superhuman at times, the way Freedom was, you can give yourselves a great chance to win late in the ball game. But it's the team that ordinarily makes the fewest mistakes that wins. I think that was the case in the Class 5 game with Maury Highland Springs. And in this game, it was just breathtaking plays by Jeffrey Overton, the running back for Freedom, who's a sophomore. He's going to be one of the best to come out of here. And the more I've thought about it in the last several hours, Julian, since calling that game, I don't know that I've seen a running back as a 10th grader do some of the things he's done. I mean, he's got the chance to be one of the very best, and the sky's the limit for him. And it's weird to say this, but I think I even tweeted this. The 6 players of the year are pretty much plain and simple, easy for me. And he's the guy in Class 6, yet his quarterback finishes up with like 62 touchdowns, and Tristan Evans, oh, by the way, he'll be back. His top 4 receivers are returning, and they only had 8 seniors on their squad. It just felt like there was questions about Freedom's competition, even leading up to us going on the air for this game. One of the people in the production is like, well, has Freedom played anybody? And my response was, and I think you might have asked me that question in one of our recent previews, what about the competition level? And it's like, they beat Stonebridge, who won state championships the back-to-back years in Class 5. I think there was a chip on their shoulder with that and some of the grumblings about, well, they haven't seen this team. They're doing this, but they wanted to kind of finish this off in style. And they really did. I mean, to score almost 50 points in a state final and have the year they did, they were really, really impressive. And Madison, they have nothing to be ashamed of because I think they gave their best, their max effort, and it wasn't the max level of athleticism, speed, and talent that Freedom has.
Was it? But there was a call that you made, or maybe it was your partner. You referred to one of Jeff Overton's runs as Reggie Bush-like, and it was. He just kind of all of a sudden he just changed directions out of nowhere and it made a 10-yard run to a 6-yard touchdown. And it was very effortless. But there were some very key points of the game. Going into halftime, Madison had first of all closed to 14. It closed to 14-7 on a great draw play to Drege, and then they ended up scoring. Freedom responds with a touchdown. It was 21-7. Going into halftime, they get down almost at a 5-yard line. There's a holding call. That's a huge call. If they go in halftime 21-14, it doesn't change the world, and it's still a huge uphill battle, but we're in the game. That was a huge call. That went against them. And then in the second half, I thought there was a few huge plays that went against them. I thought the pick six obviously was a great play, and that's a touchdown. Salute to for Freedom. But also there was the intentional there was the incomplete pass. I think the official thought because the receiver of the flea flicker was in front of the quarterback before he received the ball. I think it was clearly a lateral. So when it hit the ground, the ball should have been still alive. That play was blown dead. That was a huge call. But I have to give Freedom credit. The center, his last name is huge. I can't think of his name. His first name, 5'11", like 270. He had a huge fumble recovery that kept one of the drives alive. So I do think, the score was lopsided. But I do think things went Freedom's way, and they were able to take advantage of those things.
No doubt about that play you mentioned with the lateral live ball got blown in was a big unfortunate break that went in Freedom's favor and against Madison. And Justin Counts didn't make any excuses, which we'll get too much, I'm sure, like Doree McCain from Maury didn't, with missing a couple of his key players against Highland Springs, with Peyton Jones on 100% and Kendall Daniels out and so forth. But really, this game boiled down to Freedom making those home run plays when they had to. The pick six you referenced, Overton's run that ordinarily would just be a first down run for any senior or junior we generally watch. The third down and fourth down plays. Madison had a couple of good ones, but they finished up 2 of 11 on third down, 1 of 5 on fourth down. They didn't get the money down conversions to extend those drives and keep Freedom off the field, which they would have had to play almost a perfect type of game. They didn't have a bunch of miscues and turnovers and penalties and things of that nature, but you have to be almost flawless and on point in every category. And they just weren't quite at that level that Freedom was, which was too much in the end. They have so much firepower. I thought Madison's defense tackled well. I thought they established a running game with Angelo Dredge to a solid level, and even got the tight end Nolan Wilbrook involved as it went along. They didn't maybe establish him early out of the chute, but you fall behind against Freedom, it is so hard to catch up, and you almost have to play from in front, ball control, and it's almost, Julian, I think about this, you probably remember this, the kids used to play the NES Nintendo game, Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
Remember that? Mm-hmm. When you're little Matt going up against Mike Tyson, you be in that for about a minute into the round, but you make one false move, he knocks you out, the game's over, you start over from the beginning. It's almost like when you play someone at Freedom's level, when they're clicking, you have to keep dodging, and if he hits you, you're done. You can't have any false step because they will make you pay. They take advantage of it.
Well, what I like what Madison did was they were down the whole game. They were down. They never tried to hurry and get back in the game. They got the ball. They tried to play their game. They tried to keep the ball. They tried to get first downs and move the ball. They never worried about the score. I was impressed that Madison played within themselves and just tried to extend the game, because I think there's no way in the world they can get into a track meet with Freedom. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, they played to their strengths. They didn't get out of character. And even though I made the reference about the Mike Tyson Punch-Out video game, Freedom, they didn't feel pressure of this moment, which has also impressed me that, and I brought this up in the press conference, I think, to Coach Darrell Overton. You're 14-0. You set the state record for scoring. You have a lead in this game. It would be easy to let up. They never really had a let up or a moment where they relaxed. And I think that's also true with Highland Springs in the Class 5 game. They had a lead against Maury. They know they're not at 100%. They didn't relax. And that's when you have that killer instinct as a championship team. I think it's a common trait for all 6 teams that won the titles, from Riverheads and Graham down at the Class 1 and Class 2 levels to Phoebus at Class 3, Dinwiddie at Class 4, and then Highland Springs in Class 5, and Freedom in Class 6. And 3 of those teams are going to be moving up a division, which will make things even more interesting as we go into 2023. But you got to have that killer instinct, and those teams all seem to possess it.
Yeah. Well, I do think it was unfortunate they threw that bomb the last couple minutes of the game. And I hate to see that in a big game with that importance. It was totally unnecessary. And I think there was a play in the fourth quarter where the James Madison center gave a fist bump to the nose tackle on Freedom. I don't know what happened in the play before, but it was a great show of sportsmanship. And, and the way that game ended, the teams couldn't even shake hands. And Madison had every right to be upset about that. But let's go to the next game. The Highland Springs Maury game. I didn't realize Maury had players injured. So tell us about the players that were out, and tell us about that game as well.
Sure. Well, before the season even started, their all-state linebacker Nathaniel Booga Knox was out. Now you get to this point in the year, you made the state championship without your leading tackler from a year ago, and you almost include him in the equation. Yet that's one key part they were missing. Kendall Daniels, who had 2 interceptions in their win over Green Run, also ran for 100 yards, made a couple of pass completions. Is used as a gadget quarterback, starts at free safety. He was out for this game, did not dress. Now Peyton Jones, their stud running back, who ran for upwards of 1,400 yards, I think it was, and is headed to Duke, U.S. Army All-American. He played, but it wasn't until the second half. He was dealing with an ankle injury. He sustained in that Region 5A championship victory over Green Run, but he was obviously hampered by the injury. He wasn't at full strength. So it took a little bit out of what Maury wanted to do offensively, and Doree McCain was posed that question by me in the press conference. He made no excuses for it. He said, look, nobody said anything about it last week when we beat Green Run. And we had a couple of key guys dinged up, and we got through it and navigated it. So hats off to Highland Springs for that. Nonetheless, you do wonder if they've got Peyton Jones at or close to full strength. Would that game have been closer and more competitive? I'm not sure they beat Highland Springs. It might have been a better game. And Highland Springs got those interceptions. I mean, right out of the chute, that one by Lance Nelson where, the quarterback Mario Miller pretty much stared down his target and he got that pick six. From that point on, you knew Highland Springs' defense was ready to roll. A couple games ago, or it was last game, Braylon Johnson had 2 interceptions, the Virginia Tech commit and son of Lauren Johnson. His other son, the sophomore, who's going to be a stud for years to come, Brennan Johnson, the Region 5C defensive player here. He had an interception, so did Taki Heath, who's going to Virginia Tech. Their defense stood tall in this game. I think, the takeaways are Freedom won with its high-powered offense. Highland Springs, well, they have a very good offense. They ran the ball. Their quarterback made plays with his feet, Christian Martin. I think he was the difference in the second quarter when they got their option game going. Highland Springs' defense really was able to make things complicated for the Maury offense. It was not so much, Maury did have some miscues, but it was so much of what Highland Springs did to force those that enabled them to finish up this dream season at 15-0. And they're moving up to Class 6 next year, so people are already starting to chatter about who would win a Highland Springs Freedom matchup. Would tell you this, they've got 34 seniors that they graduate. Nonetheless, the way that program is built, and they're drilled by those coaches so well, their junior varsity looks like a varsity team, Julian. I think they're going to be right there in the prime spotlight again in contention for a state championship. And there was really no holes, no glaring weaknesses with this Highland Springs team. I think a couple of teams that came up just short, it might have been because, and Coach Lauren Johnson addressed this in the post-game press conference, maybe their seniors were focused on something else, getting their own individual stats, or maybe they had some shortcomings at the quarterback position or the offensive line position, or taking a unit. This team didn't seem to have any area that you could exploit, and they were all in on that one common goal of winning the championship and making sure those seniors, that large contingency, went out with a ring, because this was going to be that first graduating class since their four-peat from 2015 to 2018 that didn't get one if they didn't finish the job, but they did finish the job.
Incredible season. They also beat teams from out of state. They proved they're worthy state champion. I know you were busy. Did you get a chance to keep up at all with the Class 3 and Class 4 champion? No surprises, as you mentioned earlier. Dinwiddie and Phoebus won championships.
Sure, I haven't watched those games. I was watching back in replay. I did follow some reports and some updates from. We had a gaggle of reporters with us at Virginia Preps covering that game for us out at Liberty. With Robert Edmonds and Byron Jones for us on the Class 3 and Class 4 games, and then Ray Cox and Rodney Young for us at the Class 1 and Class 2 games out in Salem. Harry Dalton, I think we had the conversation both on and off air. My partner on the NFHS network, Andy Hayes, and I did that. You wonder what sophomore is going to be the best sophomore around. You got Harry Dalton at Dinwiddie, and you got Jeffrey Overton at Freedom, and he made that transition from running back to quarterback. And Julian, they put up 60-plus points in a state championship game, which is unheard of. Kettle Run had a superb year, nothing to be ashamed of. We've talked about Jordan Tapscott coming in, I believe, with 90 receptions, and what that offense did with him and Abram Chumley and Colton Quaker. But it just felt like Dinwiddie was going to score every time they touched the football. And the Kettle Run, year was terrific. They just weren't built defensively to slow down what Dinwiddie does. They play with such great pace and tempo. They can run it, they can throw it. And Billy Mills' team, I saw them back in a preseason scrimmage against Oscar Smith and Green Run. It was a tri-scrimmage. And one of the things that jumped out at me was they have a bunch of different receivers that can make plays. Dalton can run or pass. And the tempo they played with was almost reminiscent of a Class 6, Class 5 school. So when you have that, it is really tough to deal with. And Phoebus, they win the game going away in Class 3 over Heritage with a backup quarterback and Jay Early stepping in for Nolan James, who had broke a bone in his leg. And there was an emotional moment. I think you might have seen the video. It's been put out there viral that they were carrying Nolan James out there on the field to take the knee and let him get that moment, even though he couldn't play in the game per se. So they opened eyes when they beat Oscar Smith as handily as they did. So people are going to talk about these matchups. Can we get a Freedom Highland Springs and a Phoebus Dinwiddie? People want to see those type of things, but those two offenses just hit another gear that, Kettle Run and Heritage of Lynchburg had good offenses. They just didn't have that extra gear they could kick into the way the Phantoms and the Generals could.
Yeah, I think people are going to dismiss Phoebus's win because it does appear easy, but it's Class 3 competition. But as you noted earlier, the Lynchburg teams have been very tough in all classifications that area. So they were up 34-0 at halftime with the backup quarterback. I forgot Phoebus's coach's name.
Jeremy Blunt.
Yeah.
And how about the receiver, Jordan Bass, who
Jordan Bass,
30-plus touchdown catches. He came in with, I think, 9 interceptions, 3 pick sixes. He's going to Pittsburgh. There's a lot of kids that make college decisions. And, I don't want to be in the business of saying you made a good call, you made a bad call. But I will tell you this. I was thinking about this today. You're going to Pittsburgh, and he's going to be that linebacker safety hybrid. I don't know that Pittsburgh's known for its defense, both at the professional and collegiate level. He just fits the mold there. I know he did so much on offense that you say, wow, put him at wide receiver. He lays the lumber on defense. I think he's going to a great fit for him. And I know our in-state schools would like to have gotten him, Virginia Tech. But, man, oh, man, Jordan Bass, you look at player of the year material for, area or district, region, area, state. I don't know what box he failed to check. I think he checked every box and did it on both sides of the football.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just they had an incredible season. And one thing about them, not only are they Class 3 champs, they are the champions of Hampton Roads because they beat the defending champ, Oscar Smith. So you have to give them they had a great season.
And they'll remind you about it every time they get a chance to as well.
Well, you know what they did? No one thought they were going to do it. No one thought they're –
out by the margin they did. My goodness, that was – and I think when you do that, and this is probably what helped Oscar Smith last year, Julian, when you beat someone with the reputation of Oscar Smith the way they did, the rest of it, the playoff journey almost feels like it's second nature, and it's gravy for you because when you can do that, you can do that to just about anybody. And I thought about this today too. You realize they didn't trail in the second quarter or later in a game except once this year, which was to Lake Taylor 6-0 in the second quarter of the regional championship. From there, they were up 14-6, never looked back. So think about that. They played 15 games. They never trailed in the second half once, and they had a brief deficit in the second period. Now, Freedom we talked about, I'm not sure they trailed in the second quarter or later in any game. I mean, they were up the entire year. So when you win like that, it's almost like you're yawning through the competition.
Yeah. Well, and don't forget in the Oscar Smith game, they really milked the clock in the second half. That could have been, it was 48-0 at halftime. It could have been so much worse. And they were very decent that day to Oscar Smith. Well, look, I know Graham is Class 2, so it's hard to see where they stand and amidst all these bigger teams from bigger schools. But they had a great season and they had another big win, a 34-7 win over Central.
They did. Tydres Clements, who's going to become one of my favorite players in the state in the class of 2024 to watch. Julian, he had over 2,000 yards rushing, was just outstanding from start to finish. And I'll give you a quick funny story that we'll have documented on the site later on Virginia Preps that my reporter Rodney Young told me was Graham had a benefit game in late August. It was against EC Glass, Class 4 team that made the state semifinals out at Salem Stadium. And Tony Palmer rolled up a dollar bill and hid it in the dressing room. and his players found out about it this week, and he got his dollar back. So it's pretty neat that he got that, and Graham wins the state championship. And they really erupted in the fourth quarter of that game. Some wondered about their quarterback spot. Braden Meadows stepping in, hadn't been a full-time quarterback before. He did the job. Their offensive line graduated. Their stud left tackle brought back the rest of the linemen. They all raised their level of play for that unit to be collectively sound. And then the defense almost took on a bend but don't break approach. Braden Watkins was really good for them on the back end, got a number of interceptions. Their defensive line and linebackers held their assignments well. It was just a well-knit group, and they might have been in some respects more talented a year ago. Lost the game to King William, who had the best player on the field in Damon Claiborne. This time, I think Central Woodstock was not quite at their level. Tydress Clements was the best player on the field, and Graham, they knew after getting so close a year ago, they wanted to make sure they got the job done. It was a little bit like Highland Springs when they were so close to it to finish the job. I think Graham was motivated by that, and they got hardened by beating Appomattox in the state semis, coming out of a very good Region 2D where they had Ridgeview, who had pitched a couple of shutouts, and they did well against them. And Connor Roberts is maybe the unsung hero of that team up front. Tydress Clements told me that he does a lot for them. So they had players that were lunch pail type of guys that went above and beyond and did the right things on and off the field to get themselves positioned to win the state championship. And Tony Palmer's got a good program. They're going to be in the conversation for years to come.
Yeah. Well, and also in Class 1, Riverhead's won. No surprise there. Is that right?
Well, it wasn't a surprise they won the championship game. To me, it was a mild surprise that they took care of Essex in the state semis. Now, beginning of the year, we all had Riverhead's number one. They had a coaching change from Robert Casto to Ray Norcross, who was the longtime defensive coordinator. And Riverheads is one of those programs that do what they do well. They run the football. I think we had the stat this week that they ran the ball 94% of the time of their plays. They run that antiquated wing tee, if you will, and they just run it. It's old school football. Caden Cook-Cash had a monster state championship game where he ran for like 280 yards and 5 touchdowns, and he's a junior coming back. He had a shoulder injury early in the season when they lost their game to Lord Botetourt, who was a Class 3 school. And I think when they lost to Botetourt, we didn't write them off. We knew they could get back and win it. It was pretty much going to be the showdown with them and Essex in the state semis. Their defense gets forgotten about. Maybe to some respects, like we talk about, Freedom's offense being so good, Dinwiddie's offense being such up tempo. You got to have good defenses in all three phases to contribute. And I think Riverheads, because their defense keeps the score down, they don't have to rely on having to throw the football. They run the ball at you. They wear you down. They punish you. And in the case of George Wythe, they just didn't have the personnel to handle that for 4 quarters. Probably did for maybe 2 quarters, but it wears on you in the second half. And even Essex, who had been putting up 40+ per game, didn't have the material. I think Riverhead's getting through Lunenburg in the region championship and Essex, 2 offenses that were high-powered, and they were able to shut them down and contain them. They figured out a way to keep George Wythe one-dimensional, and you got to have 2 dimensions working to beat a team like that in a 4-quarter game that knows how to win and is coming in on a 6-game championship, win streak and haven't lost in the playoffs in 7 years.
Oh, Matthew, I'm going to ask you to take a stand here. The old days, you're too young to remember this, but there was a time when there was no playoffs in college football. They had bowl games. Yeah. You may have great teams going different places, but they were in different conferences. And so the national championship champion always came down to a poll, and they would vote. And a lot of times it was up in the air. But the way I look at this is, Freedom is Class 6, the highest classification, the biggest schools, undefeated, historic year in terms of scoring points. But then you got Highland Springs that beat teams from other states, also undefeated year. Not quite as dominant as Freedom in terms of points, but dominant on the field. Then you have Dinwiddie that they had a comeback win to even be here over King George, I believe. But incredible effort in the state title against Northern Virginia's Kettle Run. And then you got Phoebus. Phoebus knocked off the defending champ, which is to me is a big test. Incredible team, lots of Division I talent. If you had to give your state champion out of those 4 teams, who would be your state champion for the year?
Well, see, that's a different question than who had the best body of work, who's the best team, and if they played tomorrow. So, like, take Phoebus, for example, and I'm going to dance around to give you an answer. So this is my way to tap dance, not make everybody mad. Nolan James is hurt. So without Nolan James, and I know Jay Norley did a good job in his place, that takes Phoebus down a peg. Now, they had the most impressive win against anybody by beating Oscar Smith the way they did and took them apart. And they didn't miss a beat when they had some tests like Lake Taylor in the region championship, like Heritage of Lynchburg in the state championship. And that Seminole District, as we talked about, is good with Liberty Christian and Brookville and EC Glass. The best offense all year was Freedom. There's just no argument about it. When you set the state record in points and just move the ball as effortlessly and as easy as they did, no argument there. Highland Springs has been ranked nationally, and they have a program with 5 state championships now, 34 seniors, that you give them the nod based on they might be the most complete team, even more complete in some respects than Freedom. If we play a tournament tomorrow, I think it's obviously those top 4. I'd probably go Freedom wins the tournament by a smidge over Highland Springs. I put Phoebus 3rd, Dinwiddie 4th, although I'd caution if Dinwiddie played Phoebus, and we're talking about a healthy Dinwiddie team against a Phoebus team without Nolan James, Dinwiddie, depending on where that game's played, if it's played in Dinwiddie's place, they might go win the game. You put our neutral field, nod to Phoebus. So I know I go a lot of different directions here. I think Highland Springs, if you rank them 1 because they were more complete, see, their defense didn't get beat as much as Freedom's did in terms of giving up points. And Highland Springs played a tougher schedule. They played out-of-state teams, like you said, in Julius Chambers. They played Martinsburg. They beat Verona, who won a state championship last year. They beat LC Bird in the playoffs. They took down Stonebridge, who won 2 state championships like Freedom did. See, Freedom didn't get that luxury of playing a team that you could say, here's our body of work, this win. Yet, the way their offense just obliterated people, I don't think there's a defense, even one as consistent and as strong as Highland Springs, that stops them. So if they play tomorrow, I could see Freedom winning the game. If I was to rank them right now, I might have to rank Highland Springs 1, Freedom 2, Phoebus 3, Dinwiddie 4, just because the body of work and who they beat and what they accomplished might have been, in an interesting way, more impressive by a smidge over Freedom. Does that make any sense, or did I just go all
No,
wrong?
I think it's fair to look at it. I think you danced around the question, but I think you did a great job of doing your analysis.
Okay.
And I think everyone throughout the state is still going to love you.
Sure.
But well, Matthew, this has been great as always. Thanks for doing a great job with me this season. Looking forward to basketball. We do have these wonderful coaches at all these high schools that have put these programs together. And are they all coming back? I mean, some of these guys, these are young guys, they're talented guys. Their inspirational talks are on YouTube. Are all these guys are going to stay at their high schools next year, or are some of these guys going to be moving on to bigger jobs?
I think a few of these coaches, Lauren Johnson, to me, is cut out one day to be a college coach if he pursues that. We remind you, the one son in Berlin's going to Virginia Tech. The other son in Brennan is a sophomore. So he's sticking around for 2 more years to try to win a couple more championships, I think, at Highland Springs. Daryl Overton at Freedom, he's an up-and-coming coach in this thing, and I think he's doing a superb job with what the Eagles have. And by the way, we might revisit this conversation about who wins this thing of championships, because Freedom could be as good or better the next couple of years with so much coming back. I think Billy Mills is a high school lifer. I don't see him going anywhere. Jeremy Blunt, he's got a potential to one day, if he wants to pursue it and the right situation comes about, to maybe test the college waters, although he's a Phoebus guy through and through. I think one that we have to watch out for in years to come, because the way he runs his program and the offensive mind he is certainly intriguing for the college game, is Jeree McKinn at Maury. I know his team came up short yesterday. Second time in a row they lost in the state championship in Class 5 to Stonebridge and to Highland Springs here. I think he's cut out to one day be at the college level, because he's just a really innovative mind. So I could see him doing that. Ray Norcross at Riverheads is an old school, longtime assistant, and I could see him in a couple of years relinquishing it to someone that's got Riverheads ties. I don't think he's going to be doing this for a long period of time. So there's going to be some coaching changes. The carousel will spin around like it does year after year. But as far as the premier programs go, I'm not sure we see much turnover at the top with these schools, which puts them all in position to maybe be back in the conversation. What becomes fascinating to me, Julian, as we put a ribbon on this, is Riverheads goes up to Class 2. Will they run into Graham? Phoebus goes up to Class 4. Will they run into Dinwiddie? And Highland Springs, moving up to Class 6, would have to run into Freedom in the state semifinals. And oh, by the way, they'll be in the same region with Oscar Smith and Western Branch and Thomasdale and Manchester. That region becomes a gauntlet now. And who becomes those teams to beat at the Class 1, Class 3, and Class 5 levels, with those schools moving up? I think you start with Maury and Stonebridge in Class 5. I think you begin with Lake Taylor and maybe a Heritage of Lynchburg, a Liberty Christian, and a Lower Botetourt in Class 3. In Class 1, probably now goes to Essex, although some schools out in Southwest Virginia are applauding and jumping for joy because Riverheads is finally out of the way and they have a chance to win this thing.
Yeah. Well, look, Matthew, it's been a great season. Thanks for all you do. Your credit to Virginia sports, Virginia high school sports, and also Old Dominion and college sports as well. Congratulations to all the coaches and the players that won. I know that, I have been critical on Coach Overton and Freedom, but I have to say, they made me follow high school football this year like I never have. I mean, my kids go to Yorktown. I went to Robinson. I watched those two teams play, but his team was so historic. I think I watched 6 of his games online this year because I was so intrigued by the way they played. So they made the season fun, did incredible things. All the coaches, all the players, congratulations on a great season. I'm looking forward to previewing basketball, and you have a lot to chew on already because we've already had some huge events like Patriot, Hatfield, and DeMatha and John Marshall. Well, look, Matthew, you're VirginiaPreps.com, ESPN Radio, 94.1 Saturdays between 10 and 12. Has a great YouTube channel, lots of interviews, just like we're doing now. But always thanks for jumping on. I really enjoyed the season with you, and I look forward to talking basketball with you.
Absolutely. Likewise, Julian, it was a blast. And then on that point with Coach Overton and some of the schools, I heard Riverhead say that they were the villain this year because everybody wants them to lose. I think when you do things historic, whether we're talking about Riverheads or Highland Springs or Freedom, people almost, and Oscar Smith was this way, people want you to lose. They become like you're rooting against them. But that's a credit to what these coaches and these players and their programs do. And it's been a fun ride. And thank you for all that you do in covering the high school sports, giving them a chance to shine with your videos. I know people have enjoyed it and watch it on social media and so on and so forth. And it's going to be a fun basketball season too. You're right. I've already watched a couple of games. That Hatfield Patriot game was wild and bananas to the wire. We've got some fun storylines and compelling matchups coming. So it'll be great. And happy holidays to you and yours.
You too, Matt. Good seeing you. We'll get together in the next few weeks.
Thank you. Take care now. Be well.
Okay, man. Appreciate it, buddy. Happy holidays.